are things going for everyone? Welcome back to the Figuristo channel. My name is Paul. I found these mega Construx Masters of the Universe Skeletor skull sets in the sale department of my local Target store around 2 months ago. For a time, they were just sitting on my shelf. But after viewing Jason's video, Epic Skull Cave Entrance for D&D, on his older channel Terrain Made Easy, it inspired me to make my own version of Skull Cave out of them. As with many things, challenges always present themselves in whatever we do. And these often result in unsuccessful projects. Nevertheless, we can reduce such disasters by being prepared. To begin, I had to picture how I would make this work. I used my Dremel tool to shape sections of the Skeletor skull to fit the setting I'm trying to create. After removing some of the excess bits and rough edges of the skull, I glued them back to the other sections of the plastic and added a small piece of this foam board. I utilized this sturdy corrugated box to act as the terrain base. My initial plan was to surround the skull cave with plenty of boulders, using extruded polystyrene insulation foam board. However, none of the local hardware store around me carry them. So the best alternative that I could come up with is using an expanding gap and crack insulating spray foam sealant from this brand called Great Stuff. After waiting for about 24 hours, the maximum expanding state is eventually achieved. Then it is time to carve this foam block into a hill terrain. After connecting the foam slope to the cave, I then fill some of the corners and edges with additional expanding Great Stuff to hide any obvious gaps, including the top of the skull. I also realized that the sides of the foam is taking considerable amount of space, so I had to trim parts of it. I also discovered this packing foam, which I cut to shape and attached to the side of the skull base. Borrowing Eric's technique from Game Build channel, I created a homemade sculpting mold by combining shredded newspapers and plaster to make a texture paste and then applying it to the sides of the skull. The rest is then applied to the exterior of the skull cave. After approximately 24 hours of drying time, this is the outcome. It's a little sloppy right now, but a little fix will yield better results later on in this project. Once everything is ready and dry, I started to cover the terrain using a mixture of watered-down black paint. I have these horizontal pieces of plaster saves up. I then place them here to give detail and appearance of sediment layers. I then made a mixture of plaster, water, and gray paint to cover the majority of the terrain. Next, I added a base, using a cutout piece of foam board to the bottom part of the skull, to act as a concrete step to the entrance of the cave. I then poured a handful of terrain rocks. Secure them by spraying a watered-down Mod Podge, and let it outside to dry. At this time, I'm almost finished with my project. But I wanted to improve the terrain by applying a coat of paint and some undertone to give it a lot nicer appearance. Next was to paint the gold color skull with white, and applying a lighter gray color later when it dries, to bring out the highlights of the terrain. I then proceed to heavily blackwash the ground around the cave with a mixture of water and black paint. After the terrain dry, I follow it up with a dry brushing technique. To give a finishing touch to the terrain, let's bring some life to this desolate spot by adding pieces of vegetation. Now, the terrain is done. It is time to call it a day. Thank you for watching, everyone. To close this off, here is a short story for this scene. Enjoy. We have been tracking down a group of brute stalkers since yesterday. Finally, we caught up to them. We saw them enter this cave in a sort of desolated horizon, 200 clicks down south of our camp. They knew they are being followed. We do not know what are they up to. But we can't give up now. We have come this far, just to turn back. So we have decided to follow them inside. I have sent a communication signal to HQ to send in reinforcement as soon as possible. In the meantime, we need to find the stalkers, and to find out what is inside. What lies behind this mysterious cave.